This webinar is brought to you by Access Lex Institute and focuses on evaluation and how to create a meaningful evaluation plan for your grant proposal. Access Lex Institute awards grants to programs that will have a measurable impact on legal education by enhancing access and making legal education more affordable. Evaluation is an essential component for demonstrating the effectiveness and scalability of your program and is a key factor when Access Lex Institute makes grant decisions. My name is Andrea Sykes, and in this webinar I will share with you evaluation tools and techniques that I've fine-tuned through years of working with various grant-funded programs. This webinar will highlight the importance of evaluation and what Access Lex expects to see in an evaluation plan. You will also be shown tools that will ensure that your evaluation aligns with your grant proposal and learn how best to identify and allocate resources needed to complete the evaluation. After completing this webinar, you'll be able to create a purposeful evaluation plan for your grant proposal that effectively communicates whether your program is reaching its intended goals. What is program evaluation? Very broadly, it's a systemic analysis of information and data to measure how well a program is working. An evaluation can examine a program's operations and identify the most effective strategies or areas for program improvement. It can also spotlight the results of your program by showing its value to funders or highlighting best practices. You should plan your evaluation as you are writing your grant proposal. Think of evaluation as a way to answer the question of why does this program matter? To have an effective evaluation, you will need an evaluation plan. The plan is a written document that communicates how you will go about evaluating your program, clearly describing who will be leading the efforts, the type of investments and activities in the program and the intended results, outlining the questions and methods for assessing the program, and listing the resources you will be using to support and complete the evaluation. As you develop your grant proposal for the Access Lex Legal Education Diversity Pipeline Grant Program, you should also be creating your evaluation plan. During the remaining portion of this webinar, I will walk you through the steps to preparing this plan. We will highlight 6 key steps as shown in our roadmap. Step 1. Decide who will write the plan. Step 2. Involve key stakeholders. Step 3. Figure out what you will be measuring. Step 4. Write evaluation questions. Step 5. Select data collection methods. And Step 6. Establish a time frame and budget for your evaluation work. The first step is fairly straightforward but critical, deciding who is responsible for writing the evaluation plan. It could be the grant writer or someone else on your team. It may be a committee of multiple staff members if more than one department or organization operates the program. If the plan will be written by committee, be clear about each person's responsibilities and make sure that one person is designated as the lead for writing the evaluation plan. You could also hire someone externally, but their compensation for this work will need to be factored into your operations. If someone other than your grant writer is writing the plan, they should be working collaboratively and not in isolation. The grant writer should give clear timeframes on when the evaluation plan needs to be completed and allow time for review of the plan to ensure that it aligns with the overall grant proposal. The important thing is not to wait until the last minute to think about evaluation, but to integrate it into the entire grant proposal writing process. Once you've picked someone who will write and lead the planning efforts, they need to reach out to key stakeholders in the program, which might include staff who run it on a day-to-day basis, schools that recommend students for participation, or faculty that may teach classes. It's important to involve these stakeholders because it gives meaning to the evaluation. By participating in the planning process, you are letting everyone know that evaluation is important to the program and that you are not just checking off a box or doing it because it's required by the grant. In addition, stakeholders can learn the importance of the evaluation and see how they are critical to meeting program goals. If they have input into identifying program outcomes and give ideas on how best to measure those outcomes, you will also build support for future evaluation data collection activities. The third step is to figure out what you want to measure in your program. Your program's goals, objectives, and intended outcomes are the backbone of your evaluation. To learn more about these topics, please watch the Access Lex webinar titled Key Components of the Application. In that webinar, you'll learn more about each term and see examples used in diversity pipeline programs. One tool you can use as you identify outcomes is a logic model. It's a great way to visually organize the program's input, outputs, and anticipated outcomes. This graphic is an example of a logic model which I've used with other groups planning and evaluations. The first box lists the program's inputs, or what's invested into it. such as money or staff time. The second box lists outputs, or what the program is doing, what activities are offered, and who is participating in the program. Outputs are usually descriptions of how many students participate or the number of sessions or courses offered. The third part of the logic model is the outcomes, or what the program is achieving or accomplishing. It's good to think about outcomes at various stages. Short-term outcomes usually measure changes in learning, knowledge, or skills or attitudes. Medium-term outcomes measure changes in actions, behaviors, practices, policies, or procedures. Long-term outcomes measure changes that are environmental or changes in social or economic conditions. When writing your outcomes, be sure to have reasonable timeframes set to achieve each outcome stage. How might a logic model look for a diversity pipeline program that's designed to increase the number of underrepresented students in law school? This logic model here is a generic example of the types of inputs, outputs, and outcomes that might be identified for such a program. This example is informative and does not represent a specific program funded by Access Lex. The input box on the left highlights the possible stakeholders and resources in this program. The output box in the middle shows types of activities that might be occurring in such a program. And the outcomes box on the far right presents examples of short, medium, and long-term outcomes. The specific outcomes and timeframes will be unique to your program depending on your program's goals, activities, and where students are in the educational pipeline. Outcomes should be specific and show a target you are working towards, such as a certain percentage increase in learning, as measured by pre- and post-tests. The examples listed here are possible ways to demonstrate how you might measure change in a diversity pipeline program. Using the logic model, you can move to step 4, writing evaluation questions. Questions are the key starting point for your evaluation. They frame the scope and design of your work. Evaluation questions should be clear and specific and identify what you will be assessing or measuring. Evaluation questions can fall into one of these categories: implementation and process, or impact and effect questions. Implementation and process questions will help you understand if you are reaching the right students and whether the activities were implemented as you designed. The answers to these questions often help explain or understand outcomes that are being observed. The second group of questions are impact and effect questions. These are focused on measuring whether students are achieving the outcomes you want. These questions should reflect that you are measuring change, whether over time or between groups of students. It's important to be clear on what student group you are measuring, particularly if there are multiple years of participation or different activities targeting different groups. Let's talk about implementation and process questions a little more. These questions can be derived from the inputs and outputs section of your logic model. You should write these questions in a way that allows you to examine how resources are being used to operate your program. A well-worded question can give you answers about whether the program is operating as you designed. For example, if you are trying to increase access to law school for a particular group of students, then you might ask a question about whether the students in your program meet the criteria for participation. This is particularly helpful for your evaluation if your grant funding is tied to serving certain groups of students. Another process question can focus on whether your program is offering activities to students that meet their needs. Such questions might be: what types of internships have local law firms, courts, or government agencies offered to students? Answers to this question will give you a baseline on what is being offered to students, and a follow-up question would then ask the extent to which those internships have met student needs. Implementation and process questions are also good for program management because they lead to data collection on student experiences and can help identify needed program improvements. The second category of questions that you should include in your evaluation are impact and effect questions. These questions should be aligned to the outcomes identified in your logic model. They will allow you to describe how you measure changes that are occurring due to your program activities, whether over a few months or several years. By setting specific, measurable goals to work towards, the questions will lead to information that will directly allow you to answer whether they have been met. For example, if you are providing activities to inform students about the law school admission process, you will want a question to measure their change in knowledge after participating in the program. Such a question might be: how has students' knowledge of the law school application process changed since participation? A question measuring change will require you to gather data before and after students participate in your program. We'll discuss pre-post assessments a bit more in the next section. Your evaluation plan could also include questions that will measure changes that have occurred a few years after participation in the program, such as: what percentage of program participants applied to law school? This is where setting an expected percentage goal of the number of students who should apply to law school after participation is important, because then you can see how well you have or have not performed. Another question you could ask is, what impact did participation in the program have on students' post-secondary plans? If you have a question about the impact of the program, you will need to be sure to have a comparison group of students so you can show that any measurable change was due to your program. Impact questions are more complex to answer and require significant financial resources and expertise of your evaluator to undertake. Although impact and effect questions may be beyond the time frame of funding for your program, they are important to include because the funder will want to know that you are thinking about the long-term effects of your program as well. The fifth step in the evaluation plan development is selecting data collection methods to answer each of your questions. The questions you have selected for your evaluation will drive the type of data you'll be using, the time frame for when you will collect it, and the methods for analysis. Possible data sources include student-level data, such as grades or test scores, or program documents, such as student applications to your program. You could also include surveys or interviews, or observations of program activities. The data you collect will either be quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative data are numeric and can be counted or statistically analyzed. Qualitative data are non-numeric and provide meaning and understanding through an analysis of patterns and themes found in textual information gathered. No matter what data source you choose, clearly identify who or what you are collecting data on and when you will collect that data. For example, if you are measuring a change, then you will need data at 2 points in time to show that change. A common method to measure change in learning would be a pre-program test and a post-program test of students' knowledge. If you want to know about students' outcomes long after their participation in your program, make sure you have a plan for tracking the students after they finish. As you select data collection methods, it's important to think about how you are analyzing the data and what that will ultimately allow you to say. Early thinking about the possible results of your evaluation can help you fine-tune your proposed methods. For example, if you are using quantitative data, like students' GPAs, will you describe student performance by calculating an average GPA? Or will you use statistical analysis that compares GPAs of different student groups to determine whether there are any significant differences? The strategy you choose will affect who you collect data about and the specific elements that will be needed for your analysis. As you think through the data sources and analysis that you would like to conduct, you will need to weigh the experience, skills of your evaluator, your evaluation budget, and other resources to pick your best method. As you work through the possible data sources and analysis methods, this matrix should be used to show the relationship between your questions and data sources. It also guides you to think about possible limitations to your approach and the types of conclusions you might be able to make. As you plan your evaluation, it's important to keep in mind the final product, whether it be a report to a funder or an internal memo documenting successes and areas of improvement. The ultimate uses of your evaluation is what makes your work meaningful in the long run. We've come to the last step in writing an evaluation plan, and that is creating a time frame for your work and establishing a budget. You should create a document that lists all the key tasks and products or deliverables you will produce during the grant period. Be specific about when each task will be completed and when you will have a deliverable to share with others. If there are any key tasks or deliverables that will fall outside of the grant period, please know that as well. Here's an example of how you can communicate the evaluation timeframes. A chart in your plan would show key evaluation tasks, the first column of this table, the deliverables were produced in the second column, and when you estimate the work to be completed, the final column. This is a helpful way to communicate to both your internal stakeholders and your funder of the key timeframes of your evaluation. It can be hard to think about using limited program funds for evaluation, but it's critical that you adequately fund the evaluation process. The results from a well-thought-out and executed evaluation plan will pay dividends for your program, enabling you to highlight the successes you've seen and to demonstrate your commitment to making improvements as needed. A rough estimate for your evaluation is about 5 to 10% of your total grant budget. The types of data and collection methods you've chosen will impact this amount. If you are able to identify an evaluator as part of your grant proposal, that's great, but not required. If you have not selected an evaluator, you should be thinking about possible choices. You could reach out to other departments on your campus with grant evaluation experience, or consult the American Evaluation Association's online directory, Find an Evaluator. The link is listed here in this slide. In addition to the tools I've shared in this webinar, there are many other resources available about program evaluation. Here are 3 websites that you can refer to as you work on your evaluation plan. Thank you for listening, and best of luck as you embark on your evaluation planning. If you have any questions about the grant program in particular, please email grants@accesslex.org.